Adam Pretorius joins me here today. You can learn what his team is up to. Go over to adampretorius.com. That's going to be a clickable link in the show notes. But we're going to be talking about real estate investing. I believe you have a new development going on, and then you're also a broker realtor. So a lot of activity, man.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So you're primarily in a realtor, am I right?
Yeah, so my primary career hat is I sell residential real estate. But like most agents, you have little side projects that you do. And I do a lot of real estate investment and predominantly at least 10% of all my revenue I put towards my real estate portfolio.
Okay. Well, like you mentioned a new development. Tell us a little bit about that. How did you find your way into developing property?
Development's one of the more challenging of the real estate portfolio items, but those cater relationships. And I think that's where it starts. And, you can have some great returns in land development, but you really need to understand the risk because the higher the return, the bigger the risk. And there's a lot of risk, a lot of patience, a lot more red tape in getting started, timelines. It's not like doing a remodel or building a house or owning an income property. It's pretty in depth. And so finding the right land takes the patience, the right project. It's got to make sense, know when to say no. And for me personally, when it comes to land development, I like to have partners. I like to have more investors. I like to have a pool, spread the risk, but you also spread ideas and each person kind of brings a different level of value, whether that be the person that's more gun shy or the person that's really pushing to go forward quicker.
Being a realtor, I'm sure that you're on the forefront of any trend or anything coming happening as well. Would you say that's the case, or maybe you're have a little bit more insight onto the market?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing that I gain is kind of a little bit of insider knowledge of having the pulse of what are buyers looking for and really knowing what trends or things that we're kind of migrating towards. The pandemic had a lot of changes, right? And that really changed the way that we live in our homes and those lifestyles. I think you need to make sure that the homes you build today, the developments you do today, the income property rentals you own today, that they speak for those newer trends and you always shift, which makes it exciting. Very, very vibrant.
What trends are you focused on right now? What are you seeing?
Yeah. So the new land development that I'm doing, for example, is a PUD. So it's a planned urban development. So it's a planned community is what a lot of us think of that. And so I think more as the pandemic kind of occurred, people were looking for more than a home. They're looking for a lifestyle. And so communities are really big. They take a lot more planning, hence their name. But that'd be more common spaces, mixed housing developments, and those a lot more complex.
Yeah, it
Nope,
looks like
I'm
that.
here.
Okay. You blacked out there for a second.
Oh, I apologize.
Don't no worries. So one of the things that I was going to ask you about is realtor becoming an investor. To be kind of direct on this, I don't actually see that very often. Like, and you'd think you'd see more of it. Are you starting to see people a bit of an uptick in that yourself, or what are your thoughts on?
I think it depends on the market, right? Like real estate is a national sport, but it's a local team. And so each local market's going to be different. In my local market, you'd be hard pressed to find a builder or developer that isn't working with a realtor. And so they really kind of combine that sales knowledge and buyers habits with their entire product launch, which figuring out what types of homes to build, how to lay out the land. It's just pretty common in our market. And so that's something that for me, it was a natural next progression in my real estate portfolio. And obviously it takes a lot more capital with that risk. And so you need to kind of build your portfolio up over time so you can leverage all that capital. I started small. I started buying my own personal house. And then I started doing rental properties, income properties. And then I expanded from there to doing remodels and flips. And then I went from there to doing partnerships with builders to do new construction. And then that kind of went next to land development. And I haven't kind of progressed to my next step, which would be doing multi-unit dwellings, which you think of like as stacked flat multi-unit condos. And so that's kind of been my real estate portfolio progression over time, but how I've kind of started small and then gotten bigger with each little new step.
Hmm. It's just interesting. I would imagine you were probably one of the top producers in your market too, as an agent. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. So I rank in the top 10 of all agents by sales volume. I did a little over 35 million. I only do residential last year. We're already over 20 million this year. So we keep busy.
Well, it seems like in my market anyway, you're either we have a ton of people that call themselves realtors, but they're actually not that active. And I would have to think that you have to be producing something to do the other things that you're enjoying right now.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing for real estate is you need capital, right? That's where you got to start before you can even get into all this. And so some of that begins then just having to be a top producer or having the means to do it, but then also knowledge. Knowledge is where you kind of go for that next step. And so, yeah, I mean, Pareto's principle always says, you know what, the 20 produce 80% of the results. And so I think it's the same thing in every sales arena, including real estate. The top 20 realtors do 80% of all the sales. It's just that simple.
Well, what's your magic then? What makes you part of that 20?
Discipline. You know,
Always seems it's just that consistent, persistent behavior that a lot of people aren't willing to do.
yeah, I think it is. It's a muscle, right? You can expand it. You can learn from it. I think it begins with having processes and systems, which is very important. And then always improving and fine tuning those processes and systems. Those are very important. And that can train discipline over time. We all know how to get a six pack. It's just, do we want to put in the time and effort to do it, right? There's a process and system and setting up how you do your workouts. It's the same for everything in your life, with personal goals or career goals or your real estate investment portfolio.
Oh, well, we don't need to talk about going to the liquor store and getting the six pack, but you do have some insight around the education sector. Like, is that part of your market?
So I like to give back a little bit to my community and I like to teach, but I do usually one or two classes a year to my real estate community or to other realtors, or it could be loan officers or builders or what have you. And so this year I did a class I taught on ChatGPT and how we can really utilize the power of AI for real estate tools, for concepts, for brainstorming, and just some great potential here ahead. I think AI and computers have the ability to really enhance and enable mankind going forward.
So you use ChatGPT as kind of a brainstorming center?
I use it both for brainstorming, but it has even more complex tasks. You could take a blueprint now and put it in there and ask, where's an ideal location for a duck chase? And it will tell you. Or you could say, look, I need to expand this bathroom. Can you give me 4 or 5 ideas? You know, obviously a couple of them are pretty relevant right when you just stare at it, but it can maybe give you some ideas you didn't think of. And then that's a great starting point for thinking a little outside the box.
Hmm. Yeah, I haven't seen people use it in that way before. So I've been playing around with some of that myself. In fact, if you want to go to egghead.com, and that's head with just HED, you can go there and play around with some of the tools I put together. But one of them is purchasing agreements. Like you can upload a purchasing agreement and it'll kind of summarize it and help you with a few things. Because some of that information can get a little dense and a little help can goes a long way.
Absolutely.
So Uh, talk a little bit about your sales approach. Like one of them is it sounds like you position yourself to be more of a trusted advisor instead of
Yeah. I mean, every relationship you have to curate and make sure it's the right match. You know, there's a personality mix there. One of the things that my clients enjoy the most would probably be just my frank and candid nature and no lack of opinions when it's needed, when asked at least. Every market's a different segment. And my specialty is a luxury market. My average sale locally for my local luxury market is just over 700,000. And so I really push more of that luxury end. And so it's a different kind of target audience. It's a different market. It's different needs and wants. It's a different understanding of the strategies and things that they're looking for, which I think is important. That you got to know whatever product, whether you're building a house, flipping a house, or renting a house, you know, who your audience is, who you're trying to cater to, and figure out what their behavioral things are, their psychological things, and the things that you want to make sure that you connect on.
did you happen to just like naturally find your way into being a realtor and real estate, or was this kind of an accidental occupation?
I'll blame it on the recession. That kind of gave me a time to kind of reevaluate my strengths and weaknesses. And I went back to look at real estate. And, you know, I was originally studying art and did kind of some art studies before I landed in finance and did some finance degree stuff pre pandemic. But, art really has a creative side. And I looked at some of those creative attributes and found that, real estate really has a lot of creative solutions, and, applying that creativity kind of attribute was important for me to land where I ended up.
You were talking about giving back to your community and actually even providing some education. Like, what do you do to stay in front of the competition, and what training do you typically take advantage of?
Yeah. I mean, you can't stop learning, right? Like every opportunity, you got to take it. Just today, for example, the city was hosting a seminar on learning how to do HERS score. For those that don't know, that's an energy efficiency score. And, that's something that I think, whether it's completely related to my business or not, it's some tangible knowledge. And there's always little things and little nitbits that you can kind of extract from that I think is really important to know. And I learned a lot just from that hour lunch and learn that they hosted. And so I think continuing to make sure that, you have your inner circle, the people that you have around you are continuing to push and educate you, but also that you're outreaching to different, whether it's a volunteer thing like the city putting on a little lunch and learn, or you got your career field putting on education, continued education, or even the travel opportunities that exist to go out and see what people are doing in other markets. Because, my market's small and there's a lot of other bigger markets doing creative and new things that we wouldn't think of. And particularly in housing, I think that's important because, a lot of the trends that are on the East Coast are very different than the ones on the West Coast. And the Midwest, seeing what everyone's doing is important so you can kind of stay ahead, making sure at the end of the year, I always do kind of an analysis that you have 5 to 10 different resources that are refreshing of where do I get my print material from, my daily reading, my shows, where am I learning my trends? How can I continue to grow and learn in my field?
It's important to note, like, you're feeding your mind with a lot of material one way or another. So you got to be a bit selective sometimes.
Absolutely.
Do you invest in coaches or mentorship or anything like that? It sounds like you do put in the time and effort to finding these things.
Absolutely. I think everyone needs a coach. It's taken me a long time in my career to realize the importance of having a coach. Having a coach is somebody else that can get out of your head and think just a little differently and offer you different ways of kind of looking at not only approaches on transactions or with clients or your business approach, but also maybe your daily task list. And, I have a couple coaches that I'm working with every year now, including one right now, and then a second one. None of them are local. They're on the other side of the country. I think
Mhm.
that's important that, that's that muscle that you have to keep exercising, that, it's important to have a coach, and also things like this podcast to learn what you can from other people and what they're doing in their market to stand out, to differentiate, because that's what gives you your competitive edge.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I think you have to be open to what you don't know and seeing what else, even in a relationship and marriage, you can't always be right. You got to find what else is out there and continue to build relationships with people.
just to remind everybody, you can learn more about what Adam is up to by going to adampretorius.com. That's going to be a clickable link in the show notes. If you found some value in what we're talking about so far, do us a quick favor, share this with one of your investor friends. If you're watching us on YouTube, give us a quick like and subscribe. I'd be curious, Adam, you mentioned getting mentorship, and I'm going to guess that you're probably going to tell me too to get your mindset right regarding a few things. Did you evolve up into more luxury real estate because of it?
Yeah. I mean, I think luxury real estate in particular is a hard market segment to just jump right in from getting your career started. I mean, I got my license, as I mentioned earlier, during the recession, right? What a great year to get a real estate license, 2008, right? But you work your way up and you use your relationships and you use some of that leverage, and you don't just jump from 0 to 60. You got to kind of do slow, you stair step it. I think another big part of whatever market, if you're in sales that you're selling, you have to live it a little bit. And if you live it, you get a better idea of the need, the wants, and what people are looking for, and understanding some of the brand propositions that exist in that market. So you need to know your high end brands, your GE Monogram, your Viking appliances. You need to know how those products work. Why would somebody want to pay for a $20,000 refrigerator? That might sound crazy to one person, but to somebody in that market, that's the rational go to what they want. And so understanding those products, I think, is really important. The better you know your product, the better you're able to sell it.
So you just stunned half of the group here.
You can
There
get
is
more.
such a thing. What does that thing do?
It's got an air seal on it. The commercial parts there are very state of the art. Some very, very cool things.
So based on your experience as a realtor, then, for somebody who's looking to invest in real estate, what factors should they prioritize when evaluating a property?
Yeah. I mean, the key thing on a property is whatever the current interest rates are, don't matter. Don't get focused on that. I think Warren Buffett always said that best, right? You want to buy when the market's down, not when everyone else is buying and the market's up, because you can always refinance. You want to buy when the opportunity is there. And not just the opportunity, but it needs to be right for you. So the timing for you needs to be just as important as the opportunity itself. And so, I think the first thing is make sure that you start with understanding what your capital requirements are. I think another big thing on an income property is understand that it's not like stocks where it's completely hands off. Just put the money in the stock market and let it do its thing. There is a certain amount of hands on that's needed, unless you're going to hire a property manager, which is a separate discussion and has an expense. I think understanding that this physical asset is something that you have to take care of and that is going to require some work is really important. I would say the first place that I recommend everyone start is credit, because without credit, you can't get capital. And capital is such an important thing. And capital is what you need for any pillar of this real estate portfolio. The more capital that you have to leverage over time and the better relationship you build with your banker. When I look at a property, I look at what capital requirements are, what the target market is that I'm trying to hit. What is that monthly rent? Do you want to be serving a lower end market, a medium market, or you want to do a high end market? The lower end market's going to have higher returns. One requires more service, more needs as far as, a little bit more volatility on that lower end market. You might have to deal with evictions. You might have to deal with a depreciating asset that's going to need a lot more remodeling over time. Is that something you want to stomach? Are you willing to do that extra work? Or do you just want to park it and get a higher end one, but understand that volatile markets might change a luxury rental from, top to a little bit lower, and you may just be breaking even at time. Evaluating who your end customer is going to be, how the capital is going to end up being, and then the timing is the three things that I have to look at.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about investments, luxury real estate, and how that would possibly work. In fact, I just had a guest on earlier today that targets kind of luxury real estate in order to make Airbnb and stuff work these days.
Sure. I think the short-term rental is a whole new segment that's just entered into the real estate portfolio. And I've had one before. Boy, they're a lot of work, but they do
Yeah.
cash flow much better.
Yeah, they're a lot of work.
I mean, I think from a number standpoint, I was, in a traditional rental, your 12-month lease, I was getting about 7 to 10% on my cap rate there. And we were getting closer to 20, 22% after all expenses. There's some additional expenses, of course, on a short-term rental. So it's significantly more, but the amount of work and turnover is a lot more work. And so in the end, for me personally, I decided that I like the 7 to 10%. I was more comfortable than making a little bit more. But I think that's a personal choice. I know people that build their entire careers off just doing short-term rentals.
Yeah, it really requires you to build a good team in order to scale something like that, though. Like you said, in many, I frankly just can't get the numbers to work half the
Yeah.
time. The turnover alone is just impossible.
Well, you get your good months, right? And your good months, you make up for a lot of that capital. Then you have your off months. And I mean, the key to any real estate investment when it comes to renting, short term or long term, is vacancy. You can't ever have a vacancy. So even if you're making little, you have to fill it.
So you've mentioned your portfolio a couple times now. Like, what is your end goal? What are you trying to achieve with your real estate investing?
Yeah. So I let my spouse do all the stock market investment. And so that leaves me 100% on the real estate investment. So we're still diversified. We're just split diversified. So I like to diversify my real estate portfolio. And so I like to go in a couple different buckets. And so, from income properties to remodel, we call them flippers, I guess, from your HGTVs. I have a number of builder partnerships where I both have active and inactive relationships that bring in capital. And then I have land development. The golden one that I'd like to get to is I'd like to have a multi-unit dwelling. So that would be a stacked flat of, I don't know, 30 units or something with your underground parking or what have you. A single building that you manage. That's a big project. It takes a lot of capital. That's a goal I haven't met yet.
So is it on the horizon?
I think so. I'm not in a hurry because I don't want to rush my state investments here. That's how you can get yourself in
Sure.
trouble. But it's on the horizon, I think. Probably the next 5 or 10 years is my goal.
So what are your coach is going to ask you, I'm just
That's right.
we're just role playing now. He's going to ask you, what steps have you taken to make that goal happen?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I got to get there. It's up there on my goals. We were talking about builders earlier, and I think that's something we don't often talk about in a real estate investment. But, builders need capital too. And so, those partnerships could be that active or inactive partnerships. And what I mean by that is on an active side, maybe you're investing capital as an investor with, say, you're sharing the down payment they need to get the project going. Or maybe you're just offering to borrow your credit. You're saying, hey, builder, I understand you need more credit than maybe you can get, and I'll co-sign, I'll be your guarantor. I'm hands off. I'm not doing anything. Then I get a payout of whatever for just borrowing credit. So I think there's always a couple ways that we can look at real estate investments, and that doesn't always require actual physical capital as much as maybe just credit.
Sure. It sounds like you are a bit of a matchmaker in that regards. You kind of helping some investors find a match.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that I hadn't thought about that before.
It makes a
But
lot of sense though.
no, absolutely. A relationship needs to be the right relationship. So you need to understand, because I also have a saying where sometimes the best partnership is the one you don't do. So make sure that you know who in your goals and your shared interests before you enter into doing a project like that. And that goes for anything, whether you're doing a rental together with somebody else, or a builder, or land development, or what have you, or a flipper. Because, if one of you has different style or taste or an approach than the other, and you don't have a way to do conflict management, it can flip upside down quick.
So what do you think? Where do you think the market's going, and what should we expect?
I've been
Good.
asking myself that for a long time. The last week, I've been really, really curious. The spring market locally here, last year we just got off one of the worst years in 3 decades. The sales were
Hmm.
low. I mean, I did okay, but the sales were lower than they've ever been in 3 decades. And that was nationwide. This year, we're up 30% of sales year over year, which sounds great, but keep in mind, it was really a low period last year. But then we're starting to see things dip again. And it's hard to tell where we're going. I was on Yahoo Finance last week, and I was on there to talk optimism, and they started with a headline of how some of the national builders just had major sales declines and expectations on their next quarter. And it threw me off a minute there, because, I'm seeing an acceleration in growth in my area, but maybe I'm right at the top and we're about to start coming back down. Every market has cycles. Locally, I have 2 seasons, a spring and a fall. Summer's dead. Winter's okay. Everyone's got different cycles. So I think knowing when those cycles start and stop is important. But that's when you find your opportunities. If you're looking for a deal, you want to buy in an off season. If you're looking for the most inventory and therefore a choosy choice or opportunity, maybe you want to be in the on season. But my expectation, I think things are going to stay stable. I think we're going to see some bumpy rides here with discussions of tariffs and some other things, which so far has not been price related as much as sentiment related.
Mm-hmm.
But sentiment is what drives the economy, right? It's what drives our stocks. It's what drives the way that our buying patterns go. And so I think we could see a short blip, but at the end of the day, I think it's the supply and demand mismatch, right? We just are so lacking on supply, whether that be a rental or a house for purchase, that it's going to take time to get caught up, and it's going to stay a seller's market for quite a while.
Which is really strange. You say it's a seller's market because with the interest rates where they are, it seems like people just want to stay put, see what the market's going to do, and maybe the interest rates will come down. I saw it again today. Like for every point in interest rates drop, we add another million people to the buyer pool. That's just going to increase the seller market again.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I think, that It's become a new norm now that we've had the rates for a couple of years. People are finally kind of adjusted and got used to it. But, your option for shelter, because it's a need, is you either are renting or buying. And the other story I think that's not getting very well covered is rent rolls are up. I did a rent roll increase in my area on the income properties I have of 10%. And I thought that was a lot, but they were all rented within a week, which shows the demand far exceeded the supply and therefore
Mhm.
prices. And that probably could have gone higher, but people might be getting tired of paying the high rent and moving towards buying. But both are a shortage, whether it's rental or sales. And I think that's showing the housing shortage crisis that we have across the United States.
Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting you bring that up because I recently did comparables just like we would for any kind of fix and flip. I did that on the rental properties just to see where we were sitting on the rent. And I was surprised how quickly the market will advance ahead of you. You're right. I was surprised how much I could increase the rent in many places.
Well, and that brings up then, so you're flipping houses. Are you good then with an end goal of renting or selling? You have
Well, yeah, in the end, I think what we're kind of focused on is any kind of single family. We're using that money in hopes to buy the next multifamily.
got it. So you're beating me to my dream on that multi-unit dwelling.
Well, we don't have a ton of it right now, but that's the end goal.
Good.
So, Adam, this has been a fantastic conversation. Before we jump into the rapid fire, is there anything else we should have hit on before doing so?
I think if anyone's wanting to get started in this, the first step is start with your credit. My other advice would be go to your bank, look for local banks. That's the relationship that you should look to start. Any sort of real estate investment, it's a commercial loan, which is what we call an in-house loan. And so those are not sold off like stock on the market. They're done locally by that bank. And so build that relationship with that bank, start working on your credit, your goals. I have the same loan officer now. I can execute a deal and call them the next day and say, hey, I need you to do this project for me. We built this relationship. We've cultivated that over time. And so I think starting with the local bank is an important first step. It's not your biggest local bank. It's your smaller local banks. They tend to do more of the commercial loans. They're not trying to grow as much that they need to watch their portfolios and keep them balanced.
Though that's great advice because I get a lot of you get a lot of real estate gurus, if you will, that will tell you find the deal and the money will follow. But I've learned time and time again, it's best to get those ducks in a row first.
Yes, I would agree on that. Capital is important. You can't do real estate investments without capital, and you need credit.
Well, if you're ready, Adam, we'll jump into the rapid fire questions. But if you're ready, Adam, we'll jump in.
Love to. Fire away.
What lie do real estate investors often tell themselves?
Yeah, that's a big one. Real estate has high returns, and it can, but we all know that the relationship of return comes with risk, and the risks are super high. And you have to be careful because just last week we saw two of our biggest developers, one on the luxury end, one on the entry level, go under. The reason it happened is because the rates changed. You have a 5-year commercial loan. Well, 5 years ago, you were less than half of what we are today. And so just a few percentage points and a small shift in a market can really just take you. Make sure that you understand the risk and return because it's not without risk.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Bet on your instincts. I think that's big, not on your consciousness. Go in there. You don't want to go do what status quo is doing. When I look at projects, I look at all these builders that go all to the same place. They're chasing the same puck in the same area, right? Go to the different area. Go to an area where you don't have as much competition. Those kind of gut instincts come with time, and not following the status quo is very important to figuring out where you can find the best opportunities.
Do you have a book recommendation?
Oh, this book is good. I've probably read this book a dozen times, but Jack Daly's Hypergrowth. I love Jack Daly's work. This is one of my favorites by him. He's really big into processes and systems, which is one of my big MOs. And he really goes into how important that is for just building relationships. So I highly recommend Jack Daly, Hypergrowth.
And lastly, what single strategy or tool have you implemented that has had the biggest time saving impact to you or your business?
Time saving discipline. Discipline will breed your processes and systems. This has been really important to structure my day, to make sure that each day has a different structure and to know how my time can end at the end of the day, what I have left, where I can award a little bit extra time to allocate towards other resources.
Well, Adam, this is just fantastic. I really appreciate your time. This was great.
I had a lot of fun.